Hi, I'm Katie Miranda. Welcome to the Palestine Solidarity Telesummit. Today I'm here with Joe Catron. Some of you may have heard of Joe on the International Solidarity Movement speaking tour this spring, where he spoke at nearly 30 venues up and down the U.S. East Coast about his experiences over 3.5 years in the Gaza Strip. Or you may have seen Joe in Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen's new documentary, Killing Gaza. Or you may have read about him in Ramzi Baroud's most recent book, The Last Earth, A Palestinian Story. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Katie. It's great to be here.
So you were on this speaking tour about 6 months ago. Um,
Yes, the same one you were on, but in a different part of the country, of course.
yeah, which I was also on, and Joe and I have actually never met, oddly enough. Um,
But we keep crossing paths online, by
yeah,
phone.
yeah. So can you tell us about the speaking tour and what was the response you got from the tour? And did anybody decide to join ISM as a result of the tour?
Certainly, the tour was designed essentially as a recruitment tool for the international solidarity movement, which is facing challenges maintaining enough numbers to carry out its mission in the West Bank. So that was the idea, to travel to different parts of the country for international solidarity movement volunteers and coordinators. Those are the Palestinians who run it from inside Palestine, for us to speak about our experiences with ISM and hopefully encourage new volunteers to join. A number of people on the tour said that they planned to join, so that was something encouraging. And it was really interesting to me how little opposition we encountered. I think over the entire course, at least of my part of the tour, nearly 30 appearances, not one person ever introduced themselves as the opposition, as a Zionist. And that's certainly something that's changed a great deal just over the last few years. We wouldn't have seen that, I don't think, in 2012 or previously.
I wonder why that was. Like, did they just remain silent and take notes, or,
I would
or
assume so, but it's certainly notable that they don't care to speak up and challenge us anymore. I'm curious, was your experience the same?
yeah, it was. There was no opposition at all.
Interesting.
Yeah. So my whole idea for this telesummit kind of came about because I was reading one of your Facebook posts, and I don't remember what it said. It was from a few months back, but it was talking
Um,
about how the movement needs to have like some coherent goals and a coherent strategy. Do you remember the Facebook post I'm talking about, and can you elaborate on that?
I think I do, and if I don't remember the specific post, certainly the ideas recur to me often enough. It shouldn't be much of a challenge. Yes, I think supporters of Palestine in the United States need a kind of coherent strategy in pursuit of specific goals, which we currently don't have. We use various mechanisms, BDS campaigns, educational efforts, which could certainly be part of a strategy, but they're not. We haven't mapped out a strategy or even figured out what it is that we're trying to achieve. And that's something that I would like very much to see change.
And what do you think that should look like? How should that come about?
I mean, my personal opinion, not necessarily the position of any organizations of which I'm a part, is that those of us in the United States should make it a priority to focus on the aid, the $3.8 billion in overwhelmingly military aid, which the United States gives to Israel every year. And this is something of a throwaway line for many of us. We manage to work it into our speeches and articles, but there's really no sustained approach to it. There are no campaigns against it. I think we're starting to see the beginning of what that might look like with the No Way to Treat a Child campaign, which focuses on one specific part of the aid, the part of it that's used to imprison Palestinian children. But I also think that at this point, public opinion is shifting enough in the direction of Palestine, certainly much faster than our movements are growing, that some of us at least could be aiming a little higher and focusing on the whole package in a way that currently I don't think hardly any of us are.
That seems like such like a huge hill to climb. I mean, ending the 3 billion in aid. Um, if I
Certainly.
think about that, honestly, I can't even see that ending in my lifetime, unfortunately. But who knows? Yeah.
I'm maybe a little more optimistic. I could see it ending within our lifetimes. I agree that it would be a long and grueling fight, but I think it's a fight that has to begin at some point. It can't be put off forever.
One thing I was talking about last night with my father, we talk about this issue a lot, and I think that, I mean, this is maybe a little bit pessimistic, but I think that Zionism is, at least in the United States, is going to have to die out. Like the people donating all the money right now are older generations, and the younger generations are the ones who, the younger generations of American Jews are the ones who are not standing for this. And unfortunately, I wonder if the older generation is going to have to die out for this to actually end. Have you ever thought about it that way?
I wouldn't think about it that way. I think we have enough raw material to challenge the Zionist movement now. There's enough public opinion, enough actual people. The problem that we face, our challenge, is that up until now, the Zionists have essentially out organized us. They have more, better organizations, which isn't necessarily a matter of money. It's just a hard fought consensus, which they've managed to carve out and maintain. We could do the same, but it's going to take a lot of work, just as it took them a lot of work to establish what they have now.
Yeah, they've been doing it for a lot longer than we have.
Absolutely.
So, what, in your opinion, are resistance tactics that are working in Palestine in general, and people should keep doing them?
That's quite a good question, difficult question. I think the Great March of Return has been something very innovative that's propelled Palestine to the forefront of a lot of people's attention in the way that previous things had not. It's ongoing, it continues every week, nearly every day now. And it's going to be interesting to see how it goes into the future. Up until now, it's kind of been maneuvering around this hope that some agreement would be reached, easing the closure of the Gaza Strip. It's becoming less and less likely that such a deal will happen. So it will be very interesting to see how the march and its participants respond to that shift in reality. That, I would say, is the main new thing that's happened that I think is noteworthy. Otherwise, I think all the resistance is worth celebrating. Of course, it's all situational. Some of it works better in certain circumstances than others. It's just always a very contextual question.
I asked Haider Eid from Gaza the same question, and because I'm a little bit doubtful about, is the Great March of Return working, because so many people have been killed, and he was very supportive of it, because it's like, what else can they do? But sitting here from the safety of my Portland home, I'm just, I wonder if all those lives have to be lost.
Right? That's
You
the
know,
difficult aspect of talking about any of this. I'm very reluctant to sit in New York and cheer too loudly for any kind of resistance because
exactly.
I'm not the one paying the costs for it.
Yeah. So, what resistance tactics are working from the international community, and people should keep doing them?
I think a lot of BDS campaigns are going fairly well, more so in some sectors than others. One thing I noticed during my leg of the ISM tour was that a lot of the community groups and church groups are doing very well, while the student sector of Palestine activism is a little more dispersed. It seems to have dissipated somewhat from where it was a few years ago. Whether that's a permanent shift or whether they'll bounce back, I don't know. But a lot of what's been done, not just in terms of the concrete gains of these BDS campaigns, for example, convincing churches to sell their holdings in military contractors that service the Israeli occupation forces, but also what that exercise does to build awareness within the churches of Israel's crimes and the United States' role in them. That I think has been very valuable and is something to build on for the future.
Yeah, I agree. I just went to a Palestine Film Festival last night. It was sponsored by one of our local churches, and they're doing things like selling Palestinian olive oil and za'atar, and a lot of the local churches around here are very involved in the issue of Palestine. I wanted to go back to what you said about the student groups because I think this is something that you've talked about before.
I certainly have.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Your observations from the tour about the status of the student groups and why they are the way they are?
I mean, it was Syria, obviously. There was years of infighting. Many people slipped quietly out. Other groups blew up spectacularly. And now the student sector of Palestine activism is largely gone. For the most part, it's simply not there anymore. The conflict in Syria does seem to be winding down slowly. So perhaps that will change in the future. But for now, that's where we stand. Some campuses are doing terrific work. I love what's going on at NYU here in the city, but that's a bit of an aberration. It's rare. You don't see as much of it as you would have just a few short years ago.
And what's going on at NYU?
They've had some very innovative campaigns, essentially trying to isolate supporters of Israel and groups that are directly engaged with the Israeli government on campus. For example, getting a large number of student organizations to sign on to a statement opposing trips to Israel funded by the Israeli government and its supporters here, and stating that accepting these trips places members of the student government in a conflict of interest when it comes, for example, to future divestment measures. It's something new. I haven't seen it tried before. And I think that it's in the future, if student activism reaches a somewhat higher plateau than where it is right now, it's certainly something that should be looked at by future generations of student activists elsewhere.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that BDS activism and the church group, the activism in church groups are tactics that are really working from the international community, and people should keep doing them. What do you think? What kind of tactics in Palestine are not working and people should stop doing them?
Everything connected to Oslo, does that count?
Yeah.
I mean, all these exercises in Palestinian governance under the occupation, which were many people assumed were ultimately going to result in some kind of Palestinian sovereignty. It's now clear that that's not where any of it is leading. It's not where any of it was intended to lead, certainly from the Israeli or the US side. So while I'm not going to sit in New York and wag my finger at anybody for what they do to survive, to earn a salary, I think it's pretty clear to all of us at this point where the whole project is going and what it's actually accomplishing and who it's benefiting. It's benefiting the occupation. It's providing it with security and stability at the cost of the international community. Israel has basically used the PA or the PAs to a certain extent in both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip to pass the cost of its occupation onto international donors.
Right. And can you explain how that actually works to people who might not understand?
Certainly, to look at one sector, which is by far the largest sector, the security sector, these are Palestinian agencies whose only real mandate is to prevent Palestinian resistance to the occupation. That's all they can do, stop Palestinians from attacking occupation infrastructure. When settlers or soldiers enter Palestinian areas and attack Palestinians, they can't do anything. They're obligated under the Oslo Accords to stand down and withdraw, which is what happens. When Palestinians respond, then they can step in and prevent anything from happening. And all of this is done at the expense of the United States, the European Union, the Arab League, Japan, China, any number of donors who send their money to keep the PA afloat, to keep it securing Israel and its interest in the face of Palestinian resistance.
In other
That's
words, the
that's a
occupation
very,
within the occupation,
right.
which is a term that we hear frequently, but now we heard a very good explanation of why and how that actually happens and how we are all being screwed over and turned into Israel's stooges with our tax money going to PA security forces.
And even when you look at sectors that aren't as blatantly offensive, the healthcare or education sectors, these are ultimately the responsibilities of Israel as an occupier.
Right.
And Israel has once again absolved itself of these responsibilities, passing them off to the PA, which relies on funding from international donors to fulfill them. It's a matter of Israel establishing itself. They've really carved out a remarkable position for themselves in which they enjoy all the benefits of being an occupier, but very few of the obligations, hardly any really. It's really something to think about.
It is, yeah. It's really quite amazing. So what about, would you say that the whole concept of a two-state solution is a tactic that is not working and people should just stop and give up?
I think pretty much everyone who speaks on it honestly agrees at this point that the two-state solution as it's been envisioned simply isn't going to happen. And I'm not trying to say that those who say otherwise are necessarily dishonest people. I know some have reasons for keeping the illusion alive in hopes of preventing certain kinds of Israeli crimes, the construction of new settlements, etc. But no one actually believes in it anymore. I'm not aware of one person who actually thinks that this partition of Palestine along anything looking like the pre-1967 border, the Green Line, is going to happen. No one thinks that it is.
So what kind of actions or tactics or ideas from the international community are not working and people should just stop doing them?
What kind of international tactics are not working?
Or behaviors?
Behaviors. I think I think those of us outside Palestine can get perhaps a little too bogged down in what's going on there and the internal debates, one state versus two states, armed struggle versus popular struggle. And while we're certainly entitled, I'm not saying we should never speak of these matters, our insight from the outside isn't necessarily that valuable. I think ultimately what we should do is see what the institutions in which we have some stake, our government, our unions, our churches, our employers, are doing to enable Israel's crimes, and what steps we can take to stop that, how we can join the fight of the Palestinians from the outside. And that, I think, is more useful than over-intellectualizing it, as many of us do. And I'm certainly not trying to absolve myself here. I've probably done as much of this as anyone in the past.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's sort of the idea of keeping our eyes on our own plate. Like, what are we responsible here with our
Right.
own tax money and our own elected officials? And what can we do on a local level to start changing things?
Right. And the one other thing, which I don't know if this is entirely compatible with what I just said, but I think they both have some merit, so figure out how or if they can fit together. We can focus too much on a certain Palestinian sector to the expense of all the others. I know a number of Palestine activists in the West, particularly the English speaking countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, who like dealing with NGOs because they speak their language in every sense. They know English, of course, but they also publish glossy reports using the language of human rights, international law, blah, blah, blah. And I don't mean to downplay any of that. Certainly, we should use every weapon at our disposal to the extent that it's useful. But this is not by any means the whole of the Palestinian discourse or the Palestinian national movement. There's also a whole spectrum of political organizations and, yes, armed brigades who exercise, frankly, a lot more support within Palestine. And that's something that we should keep in mind when we're looking at it and figuring out how we relate to it. I am not here to say that no one should deal with these NGOs, but we shouldn't look to them as if they were the sole legitimate representatives of the Palestinian people. They're not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's something I was talking to Charlotte Cates about on our
Well,
interview because she has a lot of opinions about that. And unfortunately, it's hard for us here in the West to interface with any of the armed groups because we don't know if we'll get thrown in jail, you know?
I don't know that it's really that hard. In New York last year, we had a 50th anniversary celebration for one of these groups, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. We had a couple of figures from within it speak via one YouTube video. That was from Layla Khalid, who didn't want to stay up for some ridiculously late hour so she could speak live.
Mm-hmm.
And then Khalid Barakat spoke live via Skype and answered questions. And that's something that people can do. It isn't at all clear that it violates any U.S. laws. Certainly, the government hasn't taken any action against that sort of thing. They don't seem interested in much other than the actual transfer of money. So I'm not convinced that it's actually something people can't do. It's something that, for the most part, people have chosen not to do.
I see. That's a good point. So, is there anything else you'd like to say in terms of strategy and what people here in the US should be focusing on in terms of strategy?
I would just encourage all of my fellow activists here to think deeply and engage with each other about what it is we want to accomplish here and what the best means we can use to do that are. I feel that these are the conversations we need to be having that really don't happen as much as they should.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe.
Thank you very much for having me.